Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's the top of the hour. Thank you for joining us today. We know you have busy schedules. We're so excited for the second session of our Compliance is Never Enough series. Today's topic is hardening and system patching. Just a little bit of background before we dive in today. This session is being recorded, and all attendees will be receiving a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides following the presentation. You can look for those in your inbox tomorrow. All attendees will be muted throughout the session, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A feature, which is located in the WebEx toolbar. We will want to monitor those throughout the hour, so please keep asking questions. We love it when you ask questions. Kirkpatrick Price is a PCI qualified security assessor and a licensed CPA firm providing assurance services to clients worldwide. We have over 12 years of experience in information assurance by performing assessments, audits, and tests that strengthen information security and compliance controls. We offer both regulatory compliance and information security services. We provide consulting services such as policy and procedure drafting, risk assessment, internal audit plan and development, and readiness audits. We also provide guidance and audit services on frameworks such as HIPAA, SOC 1 and 2, PCI DSS, FISMA, and ISO 27001 and 27002. We also encourage you to connect with us by subscribing to our blog, visiting our library of recorded webinars, and following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Now let's welcome our speaker for today, Jeff Wilder. Jeff is the Director of PCI Services at Kirkpatrick Price, but prior to that, he was a trainer for the PCI Security Standards Council, where he was responsible for educating individuals working towards becoming QSAs. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, wherever you're at. So we want to take some time a little bit before we get started and just kind of talk about why we're going to be presenting this information. We find that most organizations, they try and do a pretty good job of having policies and procedures together around, patching their systems and keeping them up to date. But what we come to find is that they're not really looking at their environment holistically. And as the slide says here, we find that about 75% of the assessments that we have, we often find that there's some finding or some issue with their patch management program. And so we wanted to take an opportunity today and take a little bit more of a deep dive. It's a little bit deeper than what we do in most of these presentations where we just kind of talk high level. But I want to provide to you some tools and some things that you can do in managing your organization's security posture. Let's go ahead and index to the next slide. So, of course, with every one of these presentations that we do, we often talk about how your program starts with policies and procedures and standards. And your patch management program is really no different. So what I'm going to recommend that you do is have a good look at your policies, right? Understanding that a policy defines that patching needs to take place in such a time frame that protects your assets from known vulnerabilities. I'd like you to take some time and have a look at your procedures. Now, do your procedures actually define the how-to, right? The how to run your patching program. It's not necessarily how to install a patch, but what are those things that you do within your environment? How do you identify vulnerabilities? Once there's a vulnerability identified, what are the things that you do, right? If it's not patchable, right? If the vendor hasn't released a patch, what do you do to address the risk? If it is available, how do you test it, right? How do you go through your change control program? All of those things that we look at in order to kind of manage this overall patching program. So it's necessary that you have your policies, procedures. Now, as part of this as well, it's also incredibly important that your organization have the necessary tools in place. Now, this doesn't necessarily, you have to go out and buy some fancy tool to do these things for you. There are solutions out in the marketplace that will do it quite well for free, and I'm going to talk to you about what some of those things are, some of those tools. You need to make sure that your staff is sufficiently trained in order to identify, once a vulnerability is identified, is this really something that's critical or urgent? Is this something that needs to be addressed within our environment? It's not sufficient enough just to have somebody to know where to go, but these individuals have to have the cognitive skills and the technical skills in order to truly understand, are these things that we're going to be looking at or identifying, are those things truly going to be a risk in our environment, right? So we also have to have processes ensure, you know, that to make sure that as I'll talk about here shortly, is understanding that patching is just not about your servers, right? It's really about everything. It's your antivirus server, it's your file integrity monitoring server, it's your log review, you know, the log review servers. It's all of these things that are within your environment that are a critical asset. If they're involved in some way of storing, processing, or transmitting information, involved in the security management, or somehow could lend itself to impacting the security of that data that you're in custody with, you need to make sure that your patching program applies to that. All right, Jenna, if we can go ahead and index forward. So, you know, as I've kind of talked about already, you know, patching of your workstations and your servers isn't really enough. While it does a really good job of, you know, using a Microsoft WAS server or SUS server in order to patch your service, those are great, and I'm not advocating you don't do those things. I'm not advocating that you don't patch your workstations. But understand that patching goes far beyond just your just your servers and routers, or your servers and workstations. You know, I would ask you, when was the last time that you actually looked to see if there was an update for your firewall or for your router? Many times, and probably half of the cases of that 75% that we talked about earlier, and probably about 50% of the time, we find that organizations are not patching their networking equipment. Understand that these patches are just as important, right, as those patches that we would find, and these updates are just as important as those that we would find on a Microsoft server. One of the differences, though, is that depending on the type of framework that you're mapping to, right, we're not always, from a security perspective, we're not always concerned about when there's a vulnerability that would cause a DOS attack, a denial of service. If you're subject to availability, if you have you know, contractual obligations, or if you have, you know, the type of data that you're interacting with requires you to keep it updated or to prevent, you know, prevent downtime, right, then a DOS attack is something that we would look at, or that you should look at protecting against. I've got some slides here a little bit later that'll kind of walk you through what are those processes that you can use for identifying, you know, if your server or your firewalls and routers have been patched. What about the applications that you use, right? Are they currently updated? If it's a Microsoft product, chances are Microsoft is going to catch it with your update server. But however, understand that not everything installed on those servers and not everything installed on those workstations are a Microsoft product. How do you, what is your process, or how do you update your Java applications, or the Java applets that you're running, right? There's a plethora of tools that are installed. There's a lot of productivity tools that are installed that are not being patched. And it's really important that you have a process or have a program in place to identify that those systems are free from vulnerabilities, okay? You know, so once we've identified those, I would ask, what are you doing, and what are the processes that you have in place to ensure that your applications are being patched? How do you deploy those? You know, if you're a small shop, if you're, 10 or 15 PCs, it's easy enough to spend a lunchtime and go around and patch everybody's computer. But if you're 100 computers, right, you have to look at having a solution in place to manage all of the applications and making sure that all of the applications are updated as appropriate as well. Understand that it's not just about Microsoft products, right? It's really everything. If there's a vulnerability, it needs to be addressed. Now, one of the other things that I wanted to talk about in this presentation was the Internet of Things, right? That kind of seems to be the big buzzword of today. All of these organizations are putting together, everything is internet-based, right? Everything can connect to your to the internet. Look at the TVs and the stuff that the CIA was talking about with the Samsung TVs, and how the back doors that are there allow them to basically watch and listen to you in your front room through your TV. Here not long ago, this is about I don't know, I'm thinking a couple of weeks ago, there was a presentation that was made, or there was a news release that made the statement that all of this company had developed a bunch of stuffed animals that were connected to the internet, and lo and behold, these things were leaking all of your recordings and anything that was talked about. So understand that, look at your environment, and no longer is it just the servers, no longer is it just the workstations. We have to take in account many, many things within our environment. Where we have, sensitive information, we need to make sure that we're appropriately identifying it and that we're appropriately protecting it. Okay. So let's go ahead and move forward. Now, as part of this process, and I'll go into this a little bit later as well, but understand that part of your patch program, it really is just a small piece of your overall vulnerability management. Okay. So we need to make sure that we're monitoring multiple sources for known vulnerabilities. Now, if you listen to or watch Microsoft's website for their vulnerabilities, they don't let you know that there's a vulnerability until such time that they've released a patch. So I've got some websites that we're going to be talking about here shortly that I would recommend that you adhere to or that you subscribe to their services. Because they're vendor agnostic. They don't care when, if the patch is released or not. If there's a publicly known vulnerability, they publish it. And I think that that's a really good thing, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, while you're monitoring these other sites for known vulnerabilities, it's really also a good idea to monitor the vendor sites for patches and updates. As I said, the Microsoft, the Cisco's, the Juniper, they will release patches, but they don't publicly acknowledge that there's a vulnerability until such time that they typically have a patch for that. So that's why we look at monitoring for other vulnerabilities. Now, as part of that is, once you've identified a vulnerability or identified a patch, is you have to have a program in place to risk rank these. Now, there's one of the last slides I have here later on in the presentation will talk about this, but understand that just because a vendor says that this particular patch is critical or urgent does not necessarily mean that it's critical or urgent or high in your environment. But the reverse side of that is just because a vendor says that this is a low vulnerability or a medium vulnerability does not mean that it's not something that shouldn't be deployed immediately within yours. Your organization has to identify and risk rank these things so that your resource allocation and the time that you spend is spent appropriately. Now, one of the things that we recommend is that if the patch is critical or urgent, that it be deployed within your environment within 30 days. However, there are other security-related patches that aren't necessarily critical or urgent. Those still should be deployed as well, but it's not necessary that they get deployed within 30 days. Best practices would be that you at least deploy those within 90 days as a recommendation, but make sure that you're applying the other patches as well and not just the critical or urgent. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about is look at all of the breaches that have happened, in the credit card industry. Everybody's talking about Target, or everybody's talked about Target. Everybody knows about the breach that's happened out at some of the hardware stores as of late. And so when we look at those types of breaches, what occurred there was those organizations got impacted or were impacted by a zero-day attack. And effectively what happened was these attackers had a little bit of knowledge about the organization's environment, and they were able to write specific code for that client or for that environment that surpassed the antivirus detection, right? So sometimes your antivirus that you run is not always sufficient to protect you from these types of things, right, from malware. So we have to look at ways of, as part of your overall patching management and your hardening processes, at looking at ways and methods for identifying zero-day attacks. Okay, let's go ahead and go forward. Now, here's a site that I want to recommend to you, right? There's some sources, there's Secunia, there's USCert, MITRE.org. And what I would recommend that you do is you subscribe to each of these sites. Now, what these sites are nothing more than vulnerability notification services. They provide other stuff as well, but that's the primary goal of what they do. And as part of that, what they do is they will say this application is vulnerable to these known things. And many times if you click on, the links there, they will actually even go as far as providing the exploit code so you can see how things are happening. Now, when I was running networks, this is something that I found invaluable to me because a lot of times, it's going to be a period of time between when the vulnerability is identified and when your organization is able to actually get the patch implemented. Having knowledge about how these attacks are happening might be a good thing for you to know. There might be other controls or other things that you can do in order to mitigate the risk. If it's a network-based worm, if it's a network-based attack, it's easy enough just to go in and shut off those ports and services in your environment, preventing the proliferation of those attack vectors. But I just wanted to provide the vulnerability management services, right? We recommend that you look at, the Secunia, USCert, and MITRE.org. This particular screenshot that we're looking at here is from, I believe that this is from MITRE.org. So please have a look at these, spend some time in subscribing to those services. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Now, if you're running a Microsoft shop, Microsoft provides a tool called Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. Now, this is a free tool that you can use to run against all of your Microsoft environments, and it provides a plethora of information. There's a couple of things that are really nice about it. One is it's an agentless install or run. So basically, you install it on one computer, and you can run it on anything in your network, right, in your Microsoft network. And what it does is it provides you with some configuration information about are your Windows systems currently hardened according to what they would consider the minimum baseline standards. Now, this particular little screenshot you see here is actually from my desktop that I'm presenting. And what I was at the bottom of the picture there is it shows the little green checkbox that says, yes, my machine is currently patched. I had some other things going on with it that said that there's security issues. But at least from a management perspective, I know that those issues are there. I can choose to correct them or not. But Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer is a really good tool if you're a Microsoft shop for being able to identify, is my system currently updated and patched? Now, if you're one of our clients, chances are that when you encounter one of our assessors, and we get to the conversation around are your systems patched, if you're running a Microsoft shop, they will likely ask you to run the MBSA and provide you the output of that tool in order to validate that the systems are currently patched. So this is a really great tool. It's free. I've been using it for about 10 years, and it's something that, in my opinion, most organizations should use if they don't have any other means for identifying missing patches on their Windows boxes. All right, Jenna, let's go ahead and move forward. Now, not everybody's running, Windows. If you're running Linux, UNIX, hopefully you know how to check and see if you have any missing updates or missing patches. But whether you're using Yum or apt-get, basically you can pull all of the missing patches, right, and the missing updates that are on your systems. I would recommend running these commands at least monthly, making sure that your systems are currently updated and running the most current kernel and the most current software. So once again, if you need to know if you're missing any updates on your Linux, Unix environment, this is one way that you can do it here. Okay. So Jenna, now one of the other tools that we use here at Kirkpatrick Price is a tool by a company called Titania. The specific tool that we use for identifying is there vulnerabilities on your routers and firewalls is this tool called Nimper. Now, if you are not familiar with this tool, this is another tool that I recommend that you download. This is not a free tool. They will allow you to use it on a couple of devices for free. But what's really nice about this particular item is it will go through and it will tell you after you've run your config against it, it will tell you if it's currently updated or if there's any configuration issues, right? So for hardening purposes, this is a really great tool that will help you to easily and quickly identify, are we hitting the mark? Please understand that if you're one of our clients, this is one of the tools that we will run against your router and firewall config once it's provided to us. And this is what starts the basis of the conversation around, are you currently doing the right things? Right. So once again, I would recommend that you spend some time in looking at this Nimper tool. It's a really great tool for monitoring or managing all of your firewalls and all of your routers, managing all of the security and the rules that are associated with it. Okay, Jenna? So the next tool that we want to talk about is, I already kind of mentioned the Secunia. Now, they have this tool called, I believe it's Secunia Personal Software Inspector. And effectively, we started this conversation with, how is it that you're managing all of your applications that are not Microsoft specific? One of the things that I wanted to show you is I showed you a little bit ago a screenshot of the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer that said that my computer was currently patched. However, after running this Secunia PSI, right, Personal Software Inspector, it basically came back and said that only 89% of my software is currently updated. There was, about 10 items there. You can see them that was software that I still needed to update. Now, had I not run this, right, this particular tool, I would not have known that these particular applications were out of date. In fact, there's the Mozilla 5.1 is no longer, it's end of life. And while I'm in this for an industry, I didn't realize that at the time. And so having a tool like this, whether this be a free tool or an enterprise version of a tool like this to manage your overall infrastructure, depending on how large you are, is really, really an important tool for you guys to have in order to identify where is our, are we patching everything? Where are the missing patches within our environment? Adobe seems to be, Adobe, whether it be Flash or whether it be Acrobat, almost every day it seems like they're releasing some type of new patch. But having a tool like this Secunia, the Secunia system patch services indicator, whatever, it's a really great tool for you to use. I recommend that you find something like this or download this particular tool. It's free to use on an individual basis. I do believe that they have an enterprise version where you can manage everything. What's nice about it is it not only identifies that you're missing a patch or that there's an update available for an application in your Windows environment, but it will also go ahead and update it for you as well. So it's a really great tool. All right, Jennifer, we can go ahead and move forward. Now, we had talked about a little bit ago when we looked at Secunia, right? I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about the Common Vulnerability and Exposures Database, right? The NVD Database, National Vulnerability Database. And you can find this at MITRE.org. I provided you the screenshot of that a little bit ago. What I did here is I went to, this is a U.S. national database. I believe it's managed by NIST. However, this is a repository of all known vulnerabilities that have been publicly exposed. What I did for this demonstration is that I went to this website and I looked for Cisco iOS 12. And as you can see by the search results there are 77 known vulnerabilities with Cisco iOS version 12. Now, the reason why I state that is this is one of the things that we additionally do as part of assessors is we're going to look at your networking equipment. We're going to look at your hardware. We're going to look at your software. We're going to get the version numbers. And we're going to go to a database like this, the NVD, and we're going to look up whether or not your applications are known to any vulnerabilities. So once again, this is a really great website that I would recommend that you monitor. Go in and periodically look at, your systems. Have a check at your Microsoft, have a check of your Cisco gear, have a check of your Juniper gear, whatever type of gear that you're running, whether it be hardware or software. This place is a repository that's, I believe, managed by NIST that will let you know that there's known vulnerabilities. When you click on the CVE number there, you'll see at the very top one, the CVE 2007-3836. Let me explain what that number is. 2007 is or 2017 is the year that particular vulnerability was identified. 3836 is the number, right? That was the very first patch on January 1st or the very first vulnerability they identify on January 1st gets 0001. So in this case, it was the 3836th vulnerability that was identified in the year. And so you can keep track of how old these patches are within your environment by kind of looking at these numbers and keeping track of what year it came out. And then secondary to that is, the higher the number, the later it is in the year. Okay. So once again, I recommend, using a service like this as part of your vulnerability management in your hardening practice. These things are invaluable to understand how to maintain and how to keep your configuration standards up to date. Understand that if you have if there's a vulnerability that's identified and you go through your environment and have to fix it, you're going to want to update your configuration standards to making sure that the new applications that come into that go into production are not deployed in a risky state. Okay, so Jenna, let's go ahead and index forward. Now, this is another website, another organization, another place that I go to monitor for what are the known vulnerabilities, right? What are the things that are going to be exposed in the near future? And Reddit is a very good place where some of the conversations around these 0 days that we've talked about earlier start to show up. And I just went to Reddit, did a search for 0 day. I found a particular news thread, and as you can see that there's quite a bit of conversation going on here around 0 day exploits. And once again, it's not necessary that you sit and monitor these things 24 hours a day, but in a website like this, you may want to go there every so often and have a look at what are the new threads, making sure that there's nothing that you would be directly or specifically impacted by. And if you are, try to find out as much as you can in order to prevent it before the patches are actually released. Okay. So Reddit is in social media. I've got another slide. We'll talk about some other stuff here in a moment as well. But so the social media type environments are really good for that. Now the next resource that I want to provide to you is the exploit databases. Right? There's numerous exploit databases out there. And basically what these are repository of the actual source code or the actual executables that will impact your environment, or the actual executables that will impact a vulnerable system. Now, why is this of value to you to actually have access to these exploits is part of that risk ranking process. Is if there's something that's released and you really want to know, are we going to get popped by this? Are they going to get into our environment, with this type of vulnerability? Chances are you can come to a website like this and do a search for that particular vulnerability, and here's the exploit. You can have a look at the source code. You can have a look, what they're doing, how it's being developed, and how it's executed, with the idea of, are we protected in some other way from this particular thing? One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about as well is a lot of organizations say, well, we run Linux, therefore, we're not susceptible to vulnerabilities like the Microsoft. What I did here is I went to this exploit database, the exploit-db.com is one of the sites that I go to. I did a search just for Linux, and basically it came out with 943 total entries for known exploits, and here's the actual, it's not theoretical, it's not academic, it's practiced. Here's the actual exploit code, right, to execute these things. So understand that, you know, that no systems are immune from having to be patched, whether it be an Oracle database, whether it be an Oracle Aloha point of sale system, whether it be a Microsoft server, everything needs to be patched. And if you want to know if, you know, something is available, or if you want to test whether or not something is executable in your environment, websites like this is a really good place to go in order to identify and risk rank as part of your risk ranking methodology. You know, are we truly susceptible to this known vulnerability? Okay. So Jenna, can we go ahead and move forward? Jenna, can I get you to move forward for us? Oh, there we are. Thank you. So the next slide that I wanted to talk about is I had a slide a couple ago that talked about Reddit. Using social media outlets for identifying vulnerabilities is really a great place for identifying these. One of the places that I often keep my ear to the ground is IRC. If you're not familiar with IRC, it is a very, very old school chat. This is, you know, 15 years ago. This is how people were chatting. And effectively, what's happened in the industry is that the hackers, if you would, and those people and kind of that do the nefarious things, kind of hang out in these areas. Now, I hang out in them just so that I can keep watch of the conversations that are being had and understanding of what are the things that are coming down the pipe. There are multiple tools that you can use for connecting to any of these IRC servers. The IRC stands for Internet Relay Chat. There's Hex Chat. There's MIRC is another really good tool. It doesn't cost anything to connect to these things. The servers have been out for like 10 or 15 years. And just connect to them, and you can have conversations with people. You can watch, you know, what people are talking about. And a lot of times, this is where, you know, when a new vulnerability is discovered, or where a new exploit is developed, zero-day exploit. A lot of times, they're released via or in IRC in these channels first before they ever hit the marketplace or hit the industry. So IRC is a really great place for monitoring vulnerabilities and the things that you might be impacted for in the future. Okay, Jenna? Now, I want to talk a little bit about some false assumptions that a lot of organizations have, right? So, you know, what I presented to you, you know, there's a few tools that you can use to identify vulnerabilities, but understand that that's not that's not the panacea of things. I just wanted to present those to you as examples of things that you should be doing. Maybe not necessarily those sites, but perhaps sites, you know, monitoring sites very similar to the ones that I just showed you. Okay. But, you know, there are some kind of false assumptions, right? Just because there's a patch available, you know, does not necessarily mean that you have to install it. And really, I want to talk a little bit about, like, when we look at the most recent one that I had to deal with was an organization had a Windows 2000 server. The organization I was working with, you know, did not want to have to update that. And they were ready for a fight, you know, and understanding that I was going to say, oh, you know, Windows 2000 is no longer supported. You're going to have to update it. And really, that isn't true, right? Just because that there's a patch available, or just because there's a system that's deprecated, does not necessarily mean that you have to update it. You do not necessarily have to install that patch. So it really comes down to a couple of things, right? The first one is are we addressing the known risks within this environment or within this specific platform? If I have a Windows 2000 server and I am protecting against all of those known vulnerabilities that we just talked about, right? We looked at had a look at those places where we can go look to identify those things. If I am protecting myself and protecting the server and I'm protecting the environment from those known vulnerabilities, right? Then it shouldn't be an issue. I don't necessarily need to install that patch. However, like I said, though, it's about the risk management. If your organization is not managing those risks in another way, then yes, those patches need to be deployed, okay? Now, the next thing is just because a vendor says that this particular patch is a medium or this particular patch is a high, does not necessarily mean that that particular item is high or low or medium in your environment. And the last slide that I have here in a few, we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, what's really required as part of your risk management, your vulnerability management, your patch management, your hardening practice, is when we identify these vulnerabilities is that we look at them as they apply to our environment. And as I stated earlier, just because the vendor says that it's a medium does not necessarily mean that it's a medium in your environment, right? It might be something that's incredibly, critical or urgent based on how you've architected things. Those values, those risk ranking that they provide you are just kind of the baseline for a starting point for conversation that you should be having with your team. Now, if you do not have the ability to have a full risk ranking process, then I would pretty much adhere to, if the vendor says it's high, I would look to get it installed within that 30 days like we've talked about, okay? But understand that really the risk ranking process should just take into account what the industry is saying, and then you need to take a look at how that applies to you and your industry, okay? Now, as I've just, as I've kind of demonstrated as part of this slide deck here is that, I went out and ran MBSA against my computer, and, Microsoft said that my system was patched and updated. But yet when I looked at all of the servers on my environment, or looked at all the systems in my environment, or all the applications in my environment, there was, I don't know, a half a dozen or maybe a dozen items there that still needed to be patched. So just because Microsoft says that you're fully patched does not mean that you're not vulnerable, okay? Now, the other side of that is, there are vulnerabilities that are publicly disclosed that Microsoft doesn't necessarily publicly acknowledge, right? There's patches or there's vulnerabilities out there that Microsoft just probably will never patch. But yet, if we identify them, we still have to take the necessary measures to protect ourselves from against those types of things. So just because a vendor says that doesn't say that just because a vendor says that you're fully patched does not necessarily mean that you're not vulnerable, and you need to take the time, energy, and effort to identify, are we truly secured, right? So this is really the difference between being secured and just being compliant. Most organizations, most audit frameworks say you need to be currently patched. And really the question should be, are you currently secured? Because there are situations, there are configurations, there are things where, yes, you can be currently patched, but you're still left vulnerable, right? So your organization really needs to focus on being secure and not necessarily on just being compliant, okay? So we kind of already talked about that last bullet point right there is that, keeping your system patched from free will keep it from being vulnerable, right? Having the most current patching up will help you maintain some of that security posture we're looking for. However, it will not prevent you from being vulnerable, right? And then this is where that extra effort that I talked about, using that social media, going to those tools, the Secunia, going to the bug tracker, going to the National Vulnerability Database and looking for these things is one of those things that you almost have to do in today's environment if you want to keep your systems free from attack. So Jenna, if we can go ahead and move forward. Now, I've spent a little bit of time already and talked a little bit about risk ranking, and I want to continue that on just a little bit more here. Most vulnerabilities that you encounter in today's environment are accompanied with a CVSS score, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. And there are a whole bunch of items that go into deriving the score. This particular venue is not necessarily the venue for educating on the 10 or 15 different items that go into driving that score. But as part of your risk ranking process, one of the things that I would recommend that you do is go to Wikipedia and do a search for CVSS scoring. And I think the current we're at version 3.0. And look at the different metrics that are used to derive a score. And those scores are driven between a 1 and a 10. If you see anything that with a CVSS score typically of 7 or above, you need to pretty much act on that right now. That's something that's urgent, critical, and it needs immediate attention. Moving forward, then, as we have the vulnerabilities that are kind of in the 4 to 6.9 range. Those vulnerabilities are the medium ones. Those are the items that are still very serious, but probably should be installed and patched and updated and implemented based on the next, your next maintenance cycle. And then we have the CVE, or the CVSS of 1 through 2.9, and those are really just kind of more, or the 3.9. Those are more just kind of the informational, right? You do want to take those seriously, but you really want to, evaluate whether or not you need to spend the resources on that. But however, what's important to understand, though, is with that CVSS, there's multiple vectors that go into driving that score, and that's why I say just because somebody says or an organization says this is a high vulnerability or this is a medium vulnerability, it really all depends on that particular vulnerability and how the implementation of it, of the application or the system that's vulnerable, and how the actual vulnerability is executed. There's, like I said, there's a plethora of items that go into driving that score, and any one of those items, right, can change, whether or not the item is sitting out on the internet versus in a secured, server room with no internet connectivity at all. Right, those two types of items will present a very different security posture. So you need to understand how the CVSS is scored, and what I would recommend that you do is understand how it's scored so that when you go through your risk ranking process, you can understand how that score was derived and take the time necessary to risk rank that within your environment, okay? So Jenna, let's go ahead and move forward. I think that was perhaps the last slide. So did we have any questions?
Let's give everyone a moment just to send in any questions. You can use the Q&A function in the WebEx toolbar. And while you're doing that, we'll let you know about the next session in this series. Our topic will be encryption and key management, and Jeff will be the speaker again. That's about a month from today, April 19th, same time, same place. And registration for that is already up on our website, but you should get an email about that soon. And just a reminder that you will get the slides and a recording sent to your inbox as soon as possible by the end of this week. We know those are important to you guys, so we get them out as soon as possible. And it looks like today, let's see. I don't think we have any questions for today.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for spending part of your afternoon with me. Remember, this is an hour worth of CPE. So if make sure to download the actual webinar itself. You're welcome to come get it and share that with your team. Once again, my name is Jeff Wilder. If there's anything I can do for you, please feel free to let me know. Okay, here's a question we have just to come up. Would you be able to provide the presentation material from my record keeping? Yes, that information should, Peter, that information should be available to you. Why don't you reach out to me offline, and I'll be happy to help you out. Okay. All right, so that's all we had. So thank you everybody for attending.
Actually, Jeff, we have one more question.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that pop up.
Can you reiterate evaluating patches to your environment, what a business needs to include, and how to document a compensating control?
That's a really good question. So let's kind of take that in piecemeal. So a compensating control is required any time that we cannot meet the intent, or we cannot meet the requirement as specifically drafted. So we have to come up with something a little bit different to address the known risks. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to be concerned with around, the patch management and compensating control. As a given example where, let's say that there's a patch available and we identify that for whatever reason that patch is going to break, our widget machine. That's fine. We don't have to necessarily install that patch, but we still have to address the risk that was known or identified by that patch. So as long as we're addressing that risk in another way, as a given example, if let's say it's a network-based attack, you know, years ago there was the Melissa virus, the I love you virus. We all should know about those, and those were network-based attacks, right? Somebody started it by opening up an email that says I love you, and it started off a storm of network attacks. And what we did as a company is we went in and just shut off that port on all the routers and firewalls so that it couldn't proliferate through our environment. So in terms of identifying a compensating control, right, it's, you know, I can help you with specifics, you know, on an individual basis. But from a general perspective, documenting the compensating control is still something that you have to do in the event you can't meet the requirement as written. But understand that when we look at like Windows 98 and Windows 2000, and I think that your question is probably more specific to PCI, right, because you talked about compensating control. There's nothing in the PCI DSS that says that you cannot use a deprecated platform, right? There's nothing that says you can't use Windows 98. You can still use Windows 3.5.1, right, Windows 3. There's nothing that says that you can't. What it says is that you have to be currently patched, right? However, if you are not currently patched, then we look for, you know, how are you addressing these known risks. But in a situation where, you know, we encounter a Windows 95 or Windows 98 or Windows 2000 box, we'll pull the patch level and we'll see if it's currently patched. If it's currently patched, great, right? It's not necessarily that you have to get rid of it because you're running, you know, these systems. But then what we look for is, okay, you know, there's no more patches being released for these things, but here's this plethora of known vulnerabilities through the websites that I just showed you, right? We go to those websites and look at those and say, all right, then how are you addressing these risks, right? So understand that the patch management is really kind of just a part of your risk management framework. So as long as you're addressing the risk, you should be fine. Now, secondary to that, you know, we talked about the different tools. And what I would recommend doing, there's really two pieces to this, is that I would put together a program at least monthly, right, where one of your staff go out to defined sites and do searches for, you know, whatever it is that, you know, the software you're running or whatever the hardware is that you're running. Now, in terms of providing evidence that you're actually doing that, you can provide that evidence through, you know, show me, as a given example, a checklist, you know, where somebody literally checked off that you've done it, or somebody has, you know, an email reminder that gets sent out every, you know, once a month that says, hey, you need to do these things. In terms of, you know, validating from an organizational perspective, and not from an audit perspective, but from an organizational security perspective, understanding that you're doing all of those things that you need to be doing, however you want to present that evidence, however you're collecting and retaining that evidence is fine. If you can just show us that you have a systematic approach for identifying vulnerabilities and that you're addressing those vulnerabilities. If a patch is available, right, and you are susceptible to it, and it is something that needs to be deployed, then what we're going to do is then we're going to look for that compensating control. We'll have to look at the individual patch. You know, why can't you install this? You know, why can't it be installed? Do you have the business case? Do you have, you know, is there financial constraint or some business constraint for that? And then what are you doing to protect yourself against those things? If you're doing those things, then you're perfectly fine. So once again, if you would like to have a conversation about specific situations, about, you know, how do I deal with this, or how do I get through this, or I'm troubled with these things, please feel free to reach out to me offline. I'm happy to take your call. I'm happy to take your or answer your emails. So hopefully that answered your question. So Jenna, did we have anything else?
That was it.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and I'll look forward to talking to you in about a month. We're going to have a really great webinar. We're going to talk about encryption. I'm not going to go in too deep. I'm not going to be talking about cipher blocks, but we're going to spend some time in talking from a security and compliance perspective. What are those things that you need to know about? What are those things that you need to be interested in? right? You know, we often talk about what a crypto key is, or the crypto period, you know. So we're going to spend a little bit of time in helping you to understand what a crypto period is and how often you should change your keys, and there's a plethora of things we're going to want to talk about. So we look forward to having you on that, and I bid everybody adieu and have a wonderful day. Thank you.